I bought that farmhouse with every dollar I ever saved. But when I came back, I found my daughter crying at the sink serving the very people sitting in her own chairs. They called her daughter-in-law, but treated her like a maid. And when they laughed over her tears, I knew the war had begun. The fog hung low over Traverse City's Apple Hills, wrapping the red barns like silk. Nora Whitman's old pickup climbed the muddy path, its tires crunching the frozen soil. She hadn't planned to visit her daughter this early in the season, but something had tugged at her gut since last night's call. The sound of Elena's voice, brittle, tired, almost empty. When she pushed open the farmhouse door, the scent of dish soap and cold coffee hit her first. Then she saw it her daughter, standing at the sink, shoulders slumped, hands raw and cracked from scrubbing. The morning light touched the bruised half-moons under her eyes. Behind her, laughter echoed not hers. In the living room, Ruth Greer sat like a queen, her pearls gleaming as she demanded more toast. Kayla scrolled through her phone on Nora's leather sofa, one of the kids spilling juice onto the rug. "Elena, the eggs are cold," Ruth snapped. "Do them again, dear." Elena murmured a yes voice, small and distant. Nora froze at the doorway, a sharp pain blooming in her chest. It was her farmhouse, the one she'd bought for Elena after that brutal divorce 2 years ago. 5 acres of peace. 5 acres to start again. And now it looked like a circus she didn't recognize. "Good morning," Nora said quietly. Heads turned. Ruth's smile was sweet, practiced fake. "Oh, Mrs. Whitman." "What a surprise," she purred. "We didn't know you were coming today." Nora's eyes swept across the chaos, then settled on her daughter's trembling hands. Her voice was steady. "It's my house. I can come whenever I want." By mid-morning, the fog had lifted, revealing the orchard stretching in neat golden rows. But inside the kitchen, the air felt heavy. Nora sat at the old oak table she'd bought at an estate sale years ago now, buried under paper bills, grocery receipts, and half-empty coffee cups. Elena stood beside her, wiping her hands on a faded dish towel. "They've been here 2 weeks, Mom," she whispered. "It was supposed to be just a weekend." Nora unfolded a crumpled electricity bill double the usual amount. The water bill showed the same story. Then a grocery receipt, $460 in 1 week. "You paid for all this?" Nora asked. Elena nodded, eyes darting toward the living room. Ruth's laughter carried in from the sofa, where she was chatting loudly on speakerphone about their beautiful farmhouse. "They don't help," Nora pressed. Elena hesitated. "Caleb says they're family. That we shouldn't make them feel unwelcome." "Family." Nora repeated, her voice dry as gravel. Ruth suddenly appeared in the doorway, wearing one of Elena's aprons as if it were her own. "Nora, dear, don't look so worried," she said smoothly. "We're all pitching in emotionally, at least." Nora's lips curled into the faintest smile, but her eyes stayed cold. "Emotion doesn't pay bills." Ruth blinked, pretending not to hear. "Elena has such a generous heart. We're lucky to have her." When she walked away, Nora leaned forward and lowered her voice. "You bought this place so you'd never owe anyone again," she murmured. "Don't let them turn your peace into their playground." Elena's hands trembled on the countertop. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the apple trees, and something hard shifted in Nora's chest. The living room smelled of apple candles and chaos. The TV blared a morning talk show, while Kayla's kids screamed over a board game. Nora stood in the doorway, spine straight, eyes sharp, an island of composure in the storm. Ruth lounged on the sofa like she owned it, one leg crossed over the other, sipping coffee from Nora's favorite mug, the one that said, "Home is where your heart finally rests." Would someone turn that down? Nora asked quietly. No one moved. She walked over, picked up the remote, and turned the TV off herself. The room went silent, except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Ruth gave a soft laugh. My. You really like to be in charge, don't you? Nora ignored her. We need to talk. All of you. Kayla rolled her eyes. Tessa looked amused and Doug pretended to scroll on his phone. This house. Nora began, her voice firm but calm, was bought with my savings for my daughter, Elena. I signed it over to her before she ever met your son. That means it's hers alone. Ruth's expression didn't waver, but her tone sharpened. Technically, it belongs to both of them now. They're married, remember? What's hers is his, and what's his is ours. Nora stepped closer, the faint scent of soap and apples still clinging to her coat. Not in Michigan law, Mrs. Greer. Property acquired before marriage is separate. This house isn't community property. It's Elena's legal asset. Ruth smirked, but her eyes flickered the first crack in her calm. You talk like a lawyer. No, Nora said. I talk like a woman who's worked 40 years to make sure no one could ever take what's hers. The silence that followed was deep, brittle, dangerous. Kayla's child dropped a toy, and even that small sound made everyone flinch. Ruth's smile returned, thin, icy. Then maybe, Nora, you should remember something else too. What's that? Ruth leaned forward. No house stays peaceful when pride moves in. The next morning, Nora took her coffee onto the porch, hoping the cool air would calm her. But as the sun climbed above the ridge, she froze. At the end of the driveway, a bright red sign fluttered in the breeze, You Pick Apple's Greer Family Orchard. Fresh pies, $10. Her hands tightened around the mug. 2 pickup trucks were already parked near the fence. Strangers laughing as they filled paper bags with apples from the trees she had planted herself. Nora walked down the gravel path, each step crunching like thunder in her ears. Kayla was at the gate, collecting cash in a small metal box, smiling like a store clerk. What is this? Nora asked. Kayla looked startled. For half a second, then shrugged. Just a little family thing. Mom's idea. People love picking their own fruit. It's community engagement. Does Elena know? Kayla smirked. She's fine with it. We're helping her make money. Nora's gaze flicked to the old orchard shed, now filled with folding tables and coolers. Her daughter was inside, slicing apples. Her face pale, her movements mechanical. Elena, Nora said, stepping closer. Why are there strangers on your land? Ruth appeared from behind a barrel of cider, cheerful as ever. Oh, Nora, you're up early. Isn't this wonderful, a true family enterprise? I even called the local paper. They might do a story. Nora stared at her, stunned. Without Elena's permission, Ruth's smile didn't waver. We're all family here. No one needs permission for love. Nora's voice came out quiet, almost trembling. This isn't Love Ruth. This is trespass with banners. The laughter from the customers carried down the hill, light and careless, as something dark settled in Nora's chest. Nora led her daughter out to the back porch, away from the chatter and the clinking of cider glasses. The autumn air bit at their skin. Elena's apron was smeared with apple pulp. Her hands trembled as she untied it. Tell me, Nora said softly. Why are you letting them do this? Elena's eyes flicked toward the open window where Ruth's laughter echoed. Mom, please don't start. Caleb says it's temporary. He just wants peace. Peace, Nora repeated. Since when does peace sound like you apologizing for existing? Elena looked down, shoulders shaking. I'm tired of fighting. I spent 18 years with a man who called me useless every day. When Caleb came along, he was kind. I thought, if I was good, if I gave enough, maybe things would stay calm. Nora's throat tightened. So now you buy their food, clean their mess, and they sell your apples under their name because you want. Calm tears slipped down Elena's face. You don't understand, Mom. When they're angry, Caleb turns cold. He doesn't yell, he just disappears. And I can't lose him, too. Nora stepped closer. her hands cupping her daughter's face. Listen to me, baby. Long tu te kong fai la no le. Kindness doesn't mean you let people walk over you. Elena's lips quivered. Then what do I do? You start by remembering whose name is on that deed, Nora said, voice low and steady. And you stop acting like a guest in your own house. From inside, Ruth's voice carried again, commanding, cheerful, false. Ellie more cider, dear Elena, flinched. Nora didn't. Her eyes turned toward the doorway, cold and clear as glass. This ends today, she whispered. By noon, the orchard looked like a carnival. Kids were running between the rows, Ruth chatting happily beside a cider barrel, as if she were the hostess of some grand festival. Nora had seen enough. She walked straight through the crowd, ignoring the curious stares, and entered the kitchen. Elena stood at the counter, eyes swollen from crying. Mom, please don't. Nora raised a hand. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to end this. She took her phone from her coat pocket, scrolled to a contact labeled Richard Hawthorne Attorney, and pressed call. The phone rang twice before a smooth voice answered. Richard, it's Nora Whitman, she said loud enough for the living room to hear. I need you to confirm something about the deed to my daughter's farmhouse. Ruth turned from the sofa, startled. Nora, what are you doing? Just clarifying the truth, Nora said calmly. Then into the phone. Tell me again who legally owns the property at 142 Apple Ridge Road. Your daughter, Elena Whitman Greer, Richard replied clearly. Sole owner. The deed was filed before her marriage. No joint ownership. Nora put the call on speaker. And if someone refuses to leave her property after being asked, that would be considered trespassing under Michigan law, Richard said. The owner has every right to demand their removal or call the sheriff. A stunned silence filled the room. Even the TV's static seemed to hold its breath. Ruth forced a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, Nora, you can't be serious. We're family. No one's trespassing. Family doesn't need to be asked to leave, Nora said quietly, unless they've already overstayed their welcome. Caleb, who had just stepped in from the porch, looked from his mother to his wife, confusion clouding his face. What's going on? Nora handed the phone to Elena. Honey, listen carefully. You have the legal right to decide who stays and who goes. No one can make you feel powerless here. Richard's voice came through again, firm and certain. Mrs. Greer, if anyone challenges your right to your property, remind them the law is on your side. Nora ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Then she looked at Ruth, a look that was neither anger nor threat, but something sharper. Certainty. You heard the man, she said. This house belongs to my daughter, and starting now, she decides who's welcome under its roof. Ruth's smile vanished. Outside, the laughter of apple pickers faded into uneasy quiet like a storm that knew it had just been spotted on the horizon. The moment Nora ended the call, the air in the farmhouse thickened like fog before thunder. Ruth's painted smile trembled, then hardened. Trespassing nearly Nora. Are you calling the police on your own family? Nora's tone was calm, almost kind. If I have to. Laughter erupted, sharp, nervous, brittle. Kayla leaned forward on the sofa legs, crossed eyes glinting. You're bluffing. Nobody's leaving. My brother lives here. You can't throw us out. Nora walked to the center of the room. Sunlight from the window cut across her silver hair like a blade. You have 1 hour, she said evenly. 60 minutes. Gather your things and leave this house. The words landed like gunfire. Doug set down his coffee cup. Lady, you don't scare me. You should be scared of the law, not me, Nora replied. Ruth's voice sharpened, brittle but loud. You old witch! We came here for peace, for family. You twist everything into an attack. Nora tilted her head slightly. Peace doesn't come by stealing someone's home. Behind her, Elena whispered, "Mom," her voice thin with both awe and terror. "Enough," Ruth snapped. "Elena, tell your mother to stop this nonsense. Tell her we're family. You want us here, don't you?" Elena hesitated, her lips trembling. She looked at Nora, then at her husband, who stood frozen near the door, torn between two worlds. "Say it," Ruth barked. Elena closed her eyes. The words came out like a breath. "Want my house back." Silence so complete it rang in their ears. Nora stepped forward, the wooden floor creaking beneath her boots. "You heard her." Kayla jumped up, face red. "You think you can bully us because you're old? We're not scared of you." Nora's voice dropped low, soft as snow, but edged like a knife. "Be careful about underestimating older women. We've survived too much to fear people like you." The room held its breath. Even Ruth faltered. Caleb finally spoke, voice cracking. "Mom, maybe it's best if you leave for a few days, just until things calm down?" Ruth spun toward him, stunned. "Caleb, you can't be serious." But he didn't answer. The silence between them was heavier than any shout. Nora checked her watch deliberately. "You have 57 minutes left." Kayla muttered something under her breath, storming toward the hallway. Doug followed, cursing softly. The kids began to cry, confused and scared. Ruth stood still, her pride fighting panic. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You think you're protecting your daughter, but you're destroying her marriage." Nora met her eyes without blinking. If a marriage dies because a woman defends her right to live in peace, then it wasn't worth saving. Ruth's mouth opened, but no sound came. Nora turned to her daughter. "Lock the front door once they're gone. Change the codes. We'll clean this house of their mess, every bit of it." Elena nodded through her tears. Caleb looked at her, shame written across his face. Nora walked toward the door and flung it wide open. Cold October air swept through the living room, snapping curtains like sails. "You have 55 minutes, she said. Voice ringing through the orchard like a bell of judgment. No one dared to argue. Ruth's glare followed her out the door, but beneath it, for the first time, flickered something that looked a lot like fear. Outside, the apple trees swayed in the wind, their red fruit gleaming like blood in the afternoon light. The storm didn't end with shouting, it ended with silence. Thick, uneasy silence. Ruth sat frozen on the couch, staring at the empty doorway, as if the cold air itself had betrayed her. The children sniffled softly, clutching toys against their chests. Kayla was pacing near the window, her voice trembling now, instead of sharp. "She can't really call the cops, right?" Doug rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know, Kay." That lawyer sounded real enough. From the kitchen came the sound of drawers opening, closing, Elena gathering her own things, for once not anyone else's. Her movements were careful, deliberate, like a woman reclaiming oxygen after years underwater. Tessa, usually the loudest, whispered to her sister. "Maybe we should just go. This isn't worth it." Ruth snapped out of her daze. "We're not going anywhere," she hissed. "That old woman doesn't scare me." But her voice cracked mid-sentence, and that tremor said more than her words ever could. Outside, through the wide kitchen window, Nora stood by her truck, watching the orchard sway in the wind. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't even angry. Just still, like someone who had seen storms before and knew when to let silence finish the work. Inside, Elena paused and looked toward the porch, where sunlight broke through the clouds falling across her mother's figure. For the first time in months, that light didn't feel harsh. It felt like rescue, Doug muttered. 2 weeks of free food and beds? Maybe that's enough. He started collecting toys. Tessa quietly followed. When the first suitcase zipped, the sound was soft, almost tender. A small surrender. Upstairs, Ruth's voice rose again, Half desperation, half denial. They'll crawl back. They always do. But downstairs for the first time, Elena whispered to herself, barely audible but certain, "Not this time." And outside, Nora closed her eyes and finally allowed herself a breath that didn't hurt. The afternoon light turned copper as Nora went upstairs to find a broom. The house was half-packed, half-chaos bags, open drawers emptied in panic. In Caleb and Elena's shared study papers littered the desk. But one sheet caught her eye, a printed email, creased from being folded and hidden. It was from Caleb, to Ruth Greer. Subject: cold storage agreement, fall batch. Mom, the shed is ready. You can use the cooler for your pies and cider. I'll cover the electricity from the orchard fund. We can sell under Greer family brand until things stabilize. Don't tell Elena yet. She worries too much about ownership and credit. Nora read it twice, the words cutting deeper each time. Don't tell Elena yet. She felt her heart beat slow, that particular calm that comes only before fury. Downstairs, Elena was wiping the counters, humming faintly to calm her shaking hands. Nora descended quietly, holding the paper between her fingers like evidence in a trial. "Elena," she said softly, "you might want to read this." Her daughter frowned, taking the page. As her eyes moved line by line, her breath caught. He used the orchard fund," she whispered. "Without asking me," Nora nodded once. "And gave your property to his mother's business. Signed your piece away." Elena's face went pale, all sound draining from her. For a moment, she looked like she might collapse. "He promised me this house was ours. He said the farm income was for our future." Nora touched her shoulder gently. People who hide things under the word ours usually mean mine. From outside came the faint rumble of Caleb's truck, approaching the familiar grind of tires on gravel. Elena's eyes filled with tears, not the helpless kind, but the angry kind. "I thought I escaped being controlled," she whispered. Nora straightened her voice, turning steel. "Then maybe this is your second escape." Through the window, the truck door slammed. Caleb was home. Nora folded the letter back into her pocket, like a weapon of truth, her expression unreadable. The storm wasn't over. It had just changed its name. The sound of Caleb's truck door slamming cut through the house like a gunshot. The orchard wind carried dust and leaves inside as he stepped through the door, wiping his boots, unaware that everything was about to break. "Hey," he called out, forcing a casual tone. "What's with the tension out there?" Mom said. "Don't," Nora interrupted her voice, calm but cold. "Don't finish that sentence with another excuse." Caleb blinked. Excuse for what? Ruth appeared from the hallway, lips pressed in false serenity. "For your mother-in-law's tantrum," she said smoothly. "She's throwing everyone out. Claims we're trespassing. I told her you'd set this straight." Nora didn't look at Ruth. She looked only at Caleb. "Is that true?" she asked. "You invited them to stay indefinitely." Caleb frowned. "They needed time, Nora." "You know how family works." "Family," Nora said softly. That word again. She reached into her coat and unfolded the letter. "Does family also include hiding financial deals behind your wife's back?" The color drained from Caleb's face. "Where did you get that?" "From your desk," Nora replied. "You left it in plain sight. Maybe a guilty conscience wanted to be caught." Elena stood frozen beside the sink. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "You used the orchard fund, Caleb. Without even telling me?" Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her eyes. "It was temporary. Mom's pies are part of the same brand. You just gave away my name." Elena snapped louder than Nora had ever heard her. "You let them turn this place into a circus and put my orchard under theirs." Ruth stepped forward, protective, venomous. "He was trying to help his family. You should be grateful, Elena. If it weren't for us, no one would even know this farm existed." Nora turned on her. If it weren't for me, this farm wouldn't exist. The air vibrated. No one dared move. Caleb looked between the two women, the wife he'd betrayed and the mother he'd disappointed. "It's not what you think," he said desperately. "I was going to tell you," when Nora asked sharply. "After Ruth owned the orchard too. After Elena became the employee of her own husband." Elena's eyes glistened. "You said this house was our new start, Caleb. But it was always about your family." Ruth scoffed. "Oh, please. You're playing the victim again, just like last time. My son gave you a life, and this is how you repay him." Elena turned to her. Trembling, then straightened. Her voice cut through the air like frost. "No. My mother gave me a life. Your son just tried to sell it." For a moment, Ruth's expression faltered, the perfect mask slipping. Caleb stepped forward, hands raised, voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Elena. I thought you thought I'd stay quiet," she said. "Because that's what I did with my ex-husband. But I'm not that woman anymore." She took the folded letter, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall like ash to the floor. "I want every single one of them gone. Now." Ruth's face turned crimson. "You ungrateful," Nora's voice boomed over her. 60 minutes is now 40. Caleb's chest rose and fell rapidly, his jaw clenched. He looked at his mother, who had raised him with guilt, then at his wife, standing tall despite her shaking hands. For the first time, he didn't know who to defend. Outside, the sky was burning red with the sunset lighting the orchard like a battlefield. Nora's eyes caught the reflection. Fierce, unwavering. "Choose," she said quietly. Caleb froze, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how." Nora stepped closer, her face inches from his. "Then learn, because women in this house already did." The silence that followed was electric humming with the sound of choice, the kind that ends marriages or saves them. And when Ruth finally stormed toward the stairs, Nora exhaled slowly, like a general who'd just won the first of many battles still to come. The last of the daylight melted into the windows, painting the living room in amber and shadow. Everyone stood in frozen silence, Caleb staring at the floor, Ruth gripping the banister as if to keep from falling. Then from the doorway came a low voice no one expected to hear. "Enough." Every head turned. It was Frank Greer, Caleb's father, a tall, tired man with gray in his beard and the kind of quiet that usually passed for indifference. But not tonight. He stepped forward slowly, the floor creaking under his boots. "I've listened long enough," he said. 2 weeks of chaos. 2 weeks of pretending this was normal. His eyes moved from Ruth to Caleb, then finally to Elena. "And I can't stay silent anymore." Ruth stiffened. "Frank, not now." "Now," he said sharply for the first time in years. "Right now." He turned to Elena, voice softer. "I saw you, daughter. Up at dawn, cleaning floors, feeding kids that aren't yours. I watched you flinch every time someone raised their voice. And I said nothing." His throat tightened. "That was cowardice. And I'm sorry." Elena blinked, stunned. No one had ever heard him speak more than 10 words in a row. Ruth's face twisted. "Frank, stop humiliating us." He looked at her, really looked, and something inside him broke. Humiliation. "You've done that all on your own. You talk about family, Ruth, but you don't build families. You conquer them." She gasped as if he'd slapped her. "You've controlled everyone around you, Caleb. Even those kids upstairs, all under the name of love." He shook his head. "But love doesn't choke people, Ruth. It lets them breathe." The room was utterly still. Even the children upstairs had gone quiet. Frank took a long breath and turned to Caleb. "Son, I should have told you years ago your mother's way isn't love. It's fear. And she passed that fear on to you." Caleb's voice trembled. "Dad." "You have a choice," Frank said gently. Follow her fear or start living like the man your wife believes you can be. Ruth's eyes glistened, but it wasn't remorse, it was rage. After 40 years, you betray me for her. Frank's answer came steady and calm. I'm not betraying you, Ruth. I'm freeing myself. Then he faced Nora, nodding respectfully. You were right to defend your daughter. I should have defended mine-in-law sooner. Nora inclined her head, no triumph in her eyes. Only quiet respect between two old soldiers who finally spoke the truth. As Frank walked toward the door, the last rays of sunlight caught his silhouette. A man stepping out of decades of silence. Behind him, Ruth's voice cracked small and broken for the first time. Frank, please, don't go. But he didn't answer. He simply stepped outside the door, closing, with the soft final sound of history ending. The house felt emptier after Frank left, not because of his absence, but because he had taken the last shred of Ruth's control with him. She stood frozen on the staircase, one hand gripping the polished rail. The sound of the front door closing still echoed in her head. Her breath came short, shallow. For the first time in years, she had no one left to command. Elena watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart pounding, her anger cooling into something quieter. Pity. The woman who had humiliated her in her own home suddenly looked smaller, fragile, even like a statue beginning to crack. Frank Ruth whispered into the silence, her voice trembling. You can't just walk away. But the wind outside swallowed her words. She sank onto the step halfway up the stairs, her pearl necklace tilting, crooked, her face pale beneath the heavy makeup. Her hands shook as they rested on her lap, the same hands that once pointed, ordered, demanded. Now they only trembled, empty. Nora stood by the window, watching her silently. She felt no victory, only the weary understanding of another woman who'd once lived in fear, who'd learned the hard way that control was just another name for loneliness. Elena stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. You should rest, Ruth. Ruth didn't look up. He left me, she whispered. After 40 years, he just left. Elena hesitated. Maybe he finally stopped being afraid. Ruth's eyes darted toward her, filled with something between fury and grief. But then for a heartbeat, they softened the smallest flicker of realization in their depths. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily, each sound echoing like a lifetime measured in regret. Ruth leaned back against the rail, whispering more to herself than anyone, I don't even know who I am, without someone to control. No one answered. Only the wind moved the curtains, and the faint creak of the stairs carried her quiet sobs into the gathering dark. The sun had fallen low, bleeding orange light through the farmhouse windows. Dust swirled in the glow as the Greers began to pack. The sound of drawers opening bags, zipping, and hushed arguments filled the air, the slow unraveling of a kingdom built on control. Ruth remained on the stairs for a long time before finally rising. Her steps were unsteady, her breath shallow. Upstairs, her daughters were bickering as they stuffed clothes into half-broken suitcases. Kayla threw a handful of folded shirts into a bag. I told you this would happen, she snapped. You and Mom just had to push and push. Tessa whirled on her eyes wet. Oh, please. You were loving the free food and the farmhouse photos for your socials. Kayla's lip curled. At least I didn't marry a failure like you. Girls? Ruth's voice broke through, sharp but weaker than before. The two froze. She stood in the doorway, her makeup smeared, her pearls gone. Stop fighting. We're leaving. Kayla glared. And where exactly are we going? Mom-Dad took the car. Ruth didn't answer. She looked around the guest room at the floral curtains, the neatly made bed that wasn't hers, the view of the orchard that used to feel like triumph. Now it only looked foreign, like a dream she'd overstayed. Downstairs, Nora quietly supervised the chaos. She didn't speak, didn't gloat. Her calm presence was enough. The tick of the clock marked every minute closer to the hour she'd promised. Elena walked beside her, holding a trash bag filled with abandoned toys and half-empty coffee cups. Her eyes were red but clear. "Do you think they'll actually go?" "They will," Nora said. "People like Ruth only stay where they have power. Once that's gone, the air gets too heavy for them to breathe." Through the window, Caleb and Frank were loading boxes into the trunk of the Greer family SUV. Neither spoke. Frank's movements were slow, deliberate, almost reverent, as if handling the last remains of a long dead past. When Ruth came down, the house went quiet. She clutched a single suitcase, her daughters trailing behind her. Her gaze swept the room, the furniture, the photographs, the kitchen where she had once ruled. "I built this family," she whispered, "and it still left me." Nora met her eyes evenly. Families built on fear always fall. For the first time, Ruth didn't argue. She just nodded, faintly, turned away, and walked toward the open door where dusk spilled in like mercy. The car doors slammed. Engines started. Gravel crunched. Elena stood beside her mother as the vehicles rolled down the hill, their taillights fading into the orchard's dying light. When the last sound of tires disappeared, Nora finally exhaled. Now she said quietly, "Let's clean our home." And for the first time in months, Elena smiled small, real, and free. By the time the last car disappeared beyond the hill, the farmhouse fell into a silence so deep it felt holy. The kind of silence that only comes after years of noise, after the shouting, the guilt, the pretending. The air still smelled like cinnamon and cider, but underneath it was something else, freedom. Elena stood in the doorway, arms folded around herself. Her eyes swept the empty living room pillows, scattered crumbs ground into the rug, faint handprints on the white walls. Traces of invasion. Nora placed a bucket of hot water by the fireplace and handed her a rag. "We'll start here," she said. From the inside out. Elena nodded. Neither spoke as they worked, two women, mother and daughter, scrubbing, wiping, reclaiming. Every sweep of the rag felt like erasing a ghost. Nora cleaned with the slow precision of someone performing a ritual. She polished the oak table until it glowed again, then straightened the framed photo of Elena's college graduation. Her reflection in the glass looked older, but lighter somehow. Elena moved to the window, pulling down a Greer family orchard flyer still taped there. She stared at it for a moment before tearing it into pieces and dropping it into the trash. "I let them take everything," she murmured. "No," Nora said, wringing out her cloth. "You let them in, and now you let them go. That's power, too." The fireplace crackled to life, filling the room with amber light. The warmth reached their faces, softening the edges of exhaustion. Elena sank onto the couch, hair damp with sweat and soap. "Mom," she said quietly, "were you ever like Ruth?" Nora paused mid-motion, the cloth hovering over a chair arm. "Yes," she admitted after a long silence. "When your father was alive, I let him tell me what to wear, what to think, what to dream. I smiled, because I thought peace was silence." Elena's voice dropped. "What changed?" "One morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back," Nora said softly. "That's when I decided I'd rather be alone than invisible." Elena's eyes glistened. "I thought being kind would make people stay." "Kindness is good," Nora replied, sitting beside her. "But kindness without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender." They sat quietly for a moment, watching the flames dance. Outside, wind rustled through the orchard leaves, a gentler sound now, more like breathing than crying. Elena reached for her mother's hand. "You spent everything you had on this place." "I spent it on you," Nora corrected. "Money can be earned again. Daughters cannot. A tear slid down Elena's cheek, but this one didn't carry pain. It carried release. They worked until night fell, until the house smelled of soap and applewood smoke instead of resentment. Nora opened every window, letting in the cold October air. The curtains fluttered like sighs of relief. When the cleaning was done, they sat on the porch steps with mugs of tea. The moon rose over the orchard, painting the trees silver. Elena whispered, "It's quiet." Nora smiled faintly. "That's what peace sounds like. Strange at first, but you'll get used to it." The wind brushed through their hair, carrying the scent of apple smoke and second chances. Behind them, the farmhouse glowed softly against the dark, not a fortress anymore, but a home rebuilt from ashes of noise. 3 days later, the mail truck rattled down the gravel path and stopped by the farmhouse gate. The morning sun had turned the orchard gold again, the air crisp with new beginnings. Nora walked out to collect the mail, expecting bills and advertisements, not a plain white envelope with no return address, sealed neatly, her name written in a careful hand. She turned it over. The handwriting trembled, slightly elegant but old-fashioned. From Ruth Greer. Nora hesitated before calling out Elena. They sat together at the kitchen table as Nora unfolded the letter. The scent of paper and ink mixed with the faint sweetness of apples. Ruth's words were written in a thin, uneven script. "Nora, I don't expect forgiveness. I'm writing because silence has teeth, and I've lived too long letting it bite everyone around me. I wanted control because I never had any. My father used to tell me that a woman's worth was measured by obedience, that fear kept us safe. I spent 40 years proving him right, and it cost me everyone I love." Elena's eyes filled as she read over her mother's shoulder. "When I saw your daughter, I envied her. She had a mother who stood up for her. I hated that. I hated what I didn't understand. If there is any mercy left in this world, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her her kindness wasn't weakness. It was the strength I never learned to have." A silence settled between them, not cold, but fragile, as if the words themselves were afraid to breathe. Nora folded the letter carefully, pressing the creases with her palm. "It's more than I expected," she said softly. Elena nodded. "Do you believe her?" Nora looked toward the window where morning light danced across the orchard. "I believe that pain changes people, but I also know it doesn't erase what they did." Elena touched the edge of the paper, her voice trembling. "Still, I think I understand her now. She wasn't born cruel, she just never stopped being scared." For a long moment they sat in silence, each woman holding a different kind of sorrow. Nora's for the battles fought Elena's for the ones inherited. Finally, Nora reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Understanding doesn't mean we let her back in. It just means we stop carrying her in our anger." Elena smiled faintly. "Then I'll put the letter somewhere safe, not to remember her, but to remember what fear can do." Outside, a breeze swept through the apple trees, scattering the last of the brown leaves. The sound was soft, almost like forgiveness, moving through the air, unspoken, but real. Morning sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, soft and golden. The farmhouse no longer felt haunted, it breathed again. The walls that once echoed with shouting now held the hum of quiet laughter and the clatter of bowls. Flour dust floated in the air like snow. Elena stood at the counter, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back, a streak of dough across her cheek. The smell of warm apple bread filled the room, blending with cinnamon and butter, the scent of beginnings. Nora leaned against the doorframe, watching her daughter work. The rhythm of kneading and stirring had replaced the chaos of argument. Every motion looked lighter, freer, like each loaf carried a piece of her healing. Michael Caleb's father stood beside the counter, holding a wooden crate of freshly picked apples. "Best batch of the season," he said with a smile that carried both apology and pride. Elena smiled back, setting another tray in the oven. "Thank you, Mr. Greer." "Call me Frank?" he interrupted gently. "After all this, titles feel too heavy." Nora nodded, a quiet gratitude in her eyes. He had become a regular visitor since that day, not out of guilt, but out of quiet purpose. He helped fix the fence, mended the roof, and always left with a jar of Elena's jam as payment she insisted he take. Outside, the sign above the porch now read, "Elena's Hearth Bakery, made with love and light." Local families came by every weekend, their laughter filling the orchard paths. Children chased each other between trees, baskets swinging. The farmhouse, once a prison, had become the heart of something warm and good. As the timer dinged, Elena took out the bread, golden, steaming, perfect. She cut 2 slices and handed one to Nora, one to Frank. "Taste it," she said, her eyes bright. "It's the first official loaf." Nora bit in. The crust cracked gently beneath her teeth, and the taste, soft, sweet, alive, brought tears to her eyes. "It tastes," she said quietly, "like peace." Elena laughed softly, brushing a tear from her own cheek. "I think that's the best review I could ask for." Frank looked around the kitchen, his gaze lingering on the framed photo of his late wife tucked discreetly on a side shelf. "If Ruth could see this," he murmured. Nora placed her cup down. "Maybe she does," she said gently. From somewhere quieter. A long silence settled, not awkward but full, the kind that comes when wounds stop bleeding and start to scar. Elena looked out the window. The orchard shimmered under the sunbeams, hovering over blossoms already returning. "It's funny," she said softly. "I thought this place was cursed." "It wasn't," Nora replied. "It was just waiting for the right kind of hands." The old clock on the wall chimed noon. Nora poured fresh tea for the 3 of them. They sat together at the scrubbed table, sunlight warming their faces, the smell of baked apples drifting through the open door. For the first time, there was no need for words. The farmhouse was no longer just a house. It was a heartbeat, steady, strong, alive again. And in that rhythm, mother and daughter found what they had fought for all along, not victory, not revenge, but peace, earned, not given. 1 year later, autumn returned to the orchard like an old friend. The air was crisp, full of cinnamon and wind. The trees blazed gold and red, again branches heavy with fruit. Elena stood at the same window where she once cried. Now she smiled. Flour dusted her hands, her apron patterned with apple shapes drawn by the children from the village. Through the glass, families wandered the rows, laughter rising and falling like music. The farmhouse had become famous across the county. People came not just for bread or cider, but for the feeling, that calm, homegrown warmth that lived in every corner of the place. The bakery bell rang softly every time the door opened, as if greeting each soul who stepped inside. Nora sat by the counter, knitting a soft gray scarf. Her hair gleamed silver in the afternoon sun. She looked up when Elena approached, with the mail, a small stack of letters and receipts. Among them was a single cream-colored envelope postmarked from a distant town. There was no name on the front, only a faint scent of lavender. Nora's fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short note in careful handwriting. "Nora, I am in a quiet place now. The air is clean here. I plant flowers every morning and think of the orchard. I heard it thrives. Good. Some things are meant to grow once the weeds are gone. Tell Elena I meant what I wrote. Fear ruled my life, but I hope peace will rule hers. Ruth." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Nora placed the letter on the table, her eyes distant but soft. "She found her quiet," she said finally. Elena touched her mother's shoulder. "Do you think she changed?" Nora smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe she just stopped fighting the wrong battles." Outside, the wind carried the scent of ripe apples. Children's laughter mixed with the hum of bees. Time had softened everything, even memory. That evening, as the sky turned orange and dusk rolled over the fields, Nora lit a single white candle on the windowsill. Its flame flickered gently beside Ruth's letter. Elena watched the light dance against the glass. For forgiveness, she asked. Nora shook her head. For peace. Forgiveness will come on its own. The candle burned steady and quiet, its glow reflecting in both their eyes. Outside, the orchard swayed under the breath of another autumn, endless and forgiving. The trees whispered softly, not of loss or guilt, but of roots deep enough to hold, and branches brave enough to start again. And in that glow, Nora whispered almost to herself, we grew from everything they tried to break. The house was silent again, not empty this time, but full of life. The smell of roasted turkey drifted through the farmhouse like a soft memory. It mingled with pumpkin pie apples and warm bread. Outside, the last light of day spilled over the orchard, catching the reds and golds of the leaves before they fell. The long wooden table in the kitchen, once the battlefield of words and tears, now gleamed under the candlelight. Plates mismatched but clean, lined up perfectly. A bouquet of autumn wildflowers stood at the center beside a small white candle that flickered beside a folded note, Ruth's letter. Elena adjusted the napkins, smiling to herself. Her bakery apron was swapped for a simple cream sweater. Nora was stirring gravy on the stove, humming softly to an old tune from her youth, one that had once filled their first apartment decades ago. The crunch of tires on gravel made them both look up. Moments later, the door opened, and Frank stepped inside, holding a pie. Caleb followed a little hesitant, his hands full of cider bottles. I wasn't sure if... he began, but Nora cut him off with a smile. If you'd be welcome, she said. You are. Sit down before it gets cold. He smiled back, the kind that carried gratitude and shame all at once. The room filled quickly, neighbors from the nearby farms, local kids who helped in the bakery, even the old mailman who'd delivered Ruth's final letter. Everyone brought something: bread, wine, roasted vegetables. Laughter echoed against the walls that once absorbed only sorrow. As dishes passed from hand to hand, the conversation wove easily about crops, the coming snow, and the sweet smell of apples that never seemed to fade from the walls. Caleb sat quietly at first, watching Elena move between guests, with ease, her smile radiant but unforced. When their eyes finally met, she gave a small nod, not forgiveness yet, but permission to stay. Nora noticed and looked away, pretending to be busy with the gravy, hiding her small, proud smile. After dessert, Frank cleared his throat. If I may, he said, raising his glass. The chatter quieted. To peace, the kind that's earned the hard way, and to the women who taught the rest of us how to find it. Everyone lifted their glasses. The clinking sound rang like bells. Caleb spoke next, his voice low but sincere. To second chances, he said, and to knowing when to stop running from the people who loved us first. Nora looked across the table at him. That's a good start, she said kindly. Elena reached for her mother's hand, and to the house that stood through it all. The fire popped softly in the hearth. Outside, snowflakes began to fall, slow, hesitant, melting on the windows like blessings. Nora leaned back in her chair, watching the scene before her, Frank laughing with the mailman, Caleb passing pie to a shy child, Elena glowing in the candlelight. The farmhouse looked alive, not perfect, not spotless, but whole. She glanced at the letter by the candle. The flame trembled, then steadied, as if nodding in approval. I think, Nora whispered, we finally made it home. Elena looked at her eyes, bright with tears. We did, Mom. The clock on the wall struck 8, its chime blending with laughter and the clatter of plates. Outside, the orchard gleamed silver under the thin snow trees still standing, roots deep, branches reaching skyward. And inside, at that long wooden table, hearts that had once been broken beat together in the same rhythm again, slow, warm, and full of life. Winter came softly to the orchard. Snow covered the ground in white silence, smoothing over the footprints of autumn. The apple trees stood bare, their branches glistening with frost like silver lace. Nora sat by the window, wrapped in a wool shawl, a cup of tea steaming beside her. The farmhouse was quiet. Elena had gone to the market, Frank was mending the fence outside, and even the wind seemed gentler today. On the table lay a blank sheet of paper and Ruth's last letter. Nora had read it countless times, and still her eyes lingered on that final line. Fear ruled my life, but I hope peace will rule hers. She took a deep breath, dipped her pen into the ink, and began to write. Ruth, your letter reached me when the leaves were falling. I waited to reply because I wanted to be sure my words came from truth, not anger. You were right. Fear eats through everything it touches. It took pieces of you, and for a while it tried to take pieces of us too. But something grew in the ruin. Elena has found her voice again. The orchard lives. The house is full of laughter. You were part of that story, the storm that taught us what peace truly costs. Nora paused, glancing outside at the slow dance of snow. Frank's figure moved through the white field, steady and kind. I don't hate you, Ruth. I never did. I just hated what fear made you become. If peace has finally found you, then I am glad. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about letting go of others. It's about letting go of the pain they left behind. Rest easy wherever you are. The house you once haunted is now a home again. She signed it simply, Nora Whitman. Folding the letter, she didn't seal it. Instead, she opened the window. The cold air rushed in sharp and clean. She placed the paper on the sill and let the wind take it. It lifted gently, swirling upward before vanishing into the white sky, a message carried by winter itself. Nora watched until it disappeared, her lips curving into a quiet smile. Outside, the first sunlight broke through the clouds, golden and soft, melting a thin layer of frost from the trees. Forgiveness, she realized, was not an act. It was a season, one that always came if you were brave enough to wait for the thaw. Spring arrived like forgiveness, finally finding its way home. The orchard shimmered with pale green leaves and newborn blossoms. The air smelled of earth and hope, that sweet scent only the brave recognize after surviving a long winter. The farmhouse was alive again. Children's laughter spilled through the open windows. Sunlight stretched across the polished floors. The sign outside had been repainted, its gold letters, brighter than ever, Elena's Hearth Bakery, love after the storm. On this day, the town gathered for the bakery's official grand reopening. Colorful bunting fluttered from the porch. Tables were laid with pies, bread, and baskets of apples. Neighbors who had once whispered about the Greer scandal now came with smiles, warmth, and open arms. Frank stood near the gate, greeting visitors and carrying boxes of cider. Caleb was there too, quieter, humbler. He had become a steady helper, not as a husband trying to earn redemption, but as a man finally learning respect. Elena didn't call it reconciliation. She called it balance. Inside, Nora arranged flowers on the counter, daffodils and lilacs from the garden she'd started planting that winter. She wore a light blue dress, her silver hair braided neatly. Her hands, once so used to defending, now built things bred warmth, a legacy. The crowd began to gather around as Elena stepped out, apron tied at her waist, cheeks flushed from the oven heat. Applause broke out, real, joyful. She laughed, a sound that had been missing for too many years. "Welcome," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "When we opened this bakery, it wasn't just to sell bread. It was to remind ourselves, and maybe others, that no storm lasts forever." She paused, scanning the faces. Nora's eyes gleamed with tears. This place, Elena continued, was built on forgiveness, on women who refused to stay silent, on people who learned to begin again. Everything you see here is proof that love doesn't die when things fall apart. It just changes shape. The crowd clapped softly, and the air filled with the smell of baked apples. Nora reached into her bag and pulled out a small, folded envelope. "For you," she said, handing it to Elena. Elena opened it carefully. Inside was a short note written in Nora's neat script. "To my daughter, I once bought this house so you'd have a place to start over. But you turned it into a home for everyone, including me. The greatest peace I've ever known is watching you bloom in the same place you were once broken. Mom." Elena's eyes filled instantly. She set the note down and hugged her mother tight, the crowd fading around them. "You gave me roots," she whispered. "And you gave them purpose," Nora replied. Above them, the orchard shimmered a sea of blossoms, moving like waves. Somewhere among the trees, the faintest scent of lavender lingered, as if the wind carried a final blessing from Ruth herself. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, people danced in the grass to soft fiddle music. Children chased petals that fell like snow. Nora sat on the porch steps, watching the colors of dusk melt across the horizon. The bakery lights glowed behind her, warm, golden alive. For the first time in a lifetime, she didn't feel like a survivor. She felt like a gardener tending love, not guarding pain. And as the wind brushed through the orchard carrying laughter and the smell of rising bread, Nora whispered to herself, "Smiling, everything broken once can still bloom again." The evening settled over the orchard like a sigh. The last visitors had gone, their laughter lingering faintly in the air. The tables stood empty now. Only the scent of cinnamon and baked apples remained, a perfume that seemed to belong to the walls themselves. Nora sat on the front porch, wrapped in her shawl. The air was cool, touched by spring's last breeze. The horizon glowed amber, that soft moment before night truly claims the sky. From where she sat, she could see the orchard rows of apple trees, heavy with new blooms swaying in quiet rhythm. Somewhere beyond the trees, Elena's laughter floated faintly from the kitchen window, joined by Frank's low, easy voice. Nora smiled to herself. The world had changed since the first day she walked into that farmhouse, a year older, 100 lessons wiser. What was once a house of sorrow had become a sanctuary of peace. She reached for the small wooden box beside her. Her keeper of endings, she called it. Inside lay 3 letters. Ruth's apology, Nora's reply carried away by the wind, and the note Elena had written this morning. For Mom, who fought storms so I could see the sun. Nora traced the edges of the paper, then looked out again at the orchard. Fireflies had begun to appear, their soft lights flickering like tiny souls finding their way home. She whispered to the air, almost like a prayer. "I forgive you, Ruth, and thank you for showing me what not to become." The words didn't echo. They simply rested, melting into the twilight. The farmhouse light spilled gently onto the porch. Through the open window, she could see Elena kneading dough, her sleeves rolled up, her face peaceful. In that glow, Nora saw the little girl who used to cry after school, the woman who had learned to stand tall, and she knew her work was done. The sky deepened to violet. Crickets began to sing. Nora leaned back in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, her heart steady and full. She thought of everything they'd survived, fear, loss, guilt, and of the miracle that came after forgiveness, without forgetting love, without possession, peace without silence. Her eyes grew heavy, but her smile remained. The last light of day brushed her cheek soft as a promise kept. Inside, a candle flickered by the window, the same white one she'd lit for peace months ago. Its flame wavered once, then steadied, glowing strong against the dark. The orchard swayed, whispering its eternal lullaby. And in that hush between sunset and nightfall, Nora whispered her final truth to the wind. Every storm ends in light, if you wait long enough to see it. The porch creaked softly. The candle burned on, and the house finally was home. How did this story touch you? Tell us in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. If it moved your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Tap the so you won't miss our next emotional story. And before you go, click on the end screen to discover more powerful, heartwarming tales waiting just for you. See you in the next story.